Hi guys, today I'm going to show you how to take an orchid that you buy at the store and transplant it to a container to grow in full water culture. So I bought this beautiful orchid at Trader Joe's, and I always find that they have a nice selection of orchids, and I got this pretty glass container at Goodwill because you don't need a brand new glass container, and you want something that can hold all of the roots. When you're looking at orchids to purchase, you want to make sure that they have a substantial root system. So when I'm looking at this orchid, I see that it has a lot of roots. It really just wants to get out of this container. And orchids in the wild grow on the side of trees, so their roots don't like to be submerged all the time in water, and they actually like to be exposed to air. So the problem with orchids when you buy them at the store is that they're in this bark or moss, and their roots are suffocated. So you want to remove the orchid from the container and remove all of the moss. So I'm going to take this orchid out of its container. Right now I think it has they're usually in these plastic containers, and you can see all of the roots in here. So I want to remove this plastic container, and I want to get all of that bark or moss or whatever off of the roots. So here we go. You want to try not to damage the root system. So when you're doing this, just be kind of gentle. And if you have any roots peeking out of the bottom, like I have this one peeking out of the bottom, just cut it off. It's fine. If you can salvage it, that's good too, but if you have to cut it, don't worry. These orchids will actually sprout new roots when they're healthy. So even if you have a damaged root system, your orchid should be okay. So now I have my orchid out of the container, and you see that it has all of this bark. So I want to go ahead and remove as much of that bark as I can. So I'm just going to try to salvage as many roots and remove this bark. And it's kind of a tedious process, but you want to make sure you get it all off. And even the bark that's kind of stuck on the roots, you want to get those off too, because if you have pieces of bark or moss remaining on your root system, it will actually rot your roots, and eventually those roots will die. So just keep going and remove all of your moss. So I've removed most of the bark and the moss from this orchid, and you can see it has a really nice root structure. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to rinse these roots, and I'm going to get even more of that bark off. So rinsing the roots. Your goal is really to get these roots as clean as you possibly can without damaging them, or you're going to damage some, but you want to maintain as much of the integrity of the root system as you can. Once you've got your roots clean, you want to go back and cut off any dead roots. So I found a dead root here, and I'm just going to cut it off. Let's see. And then I'm going to rinse my roots again and analyze them further and try to get even more of that bark or peat moss off. Now that my roots are clean, I'm going to take a container and just fill it with water, but not all the way with water. I only want the bottom third of the roots to be submerged in water. And I don't want this center part of the plant up here to get wet. So I'm going to put about this much water. That may be too much, but I'm going to put the roots into my container here. I'm going to try not to damage them. I have kind of a marginal leaf here. This may need to come off eventually, but I'm just going to leave it for now. But if I have any dead leaves. I would also, I have one over here. I'm just gonna take that off. And now my roots, sorry, I'll turn that off. Now my roots are about 1/3 submerged in water, and this orchid is good to go. You can continue to analyze the roots and try to take more bark off. If you notice there's a dead root or a black area, just cut it off. But that's it. So now I have transplanted this orchid and it's living in full water culture. And what's so cool is that not only is the plant on display, but the root structure is also on display. And you just want to make sure you put this in an area where it gets some sun, because they do like light. And change your water every so often. And if your orchid starts getting dehydrated looking, that means something's wrong and you might need to give it some orchid food. But just go online and Google orchids in full water culture and you will find so much cool information, and you can grow your orchids year round.